And I believe Amanda is going to give us a little primer to start.
All right, hello, Chair and everyone. As usual, I'm Amanda Prosser with Legislative Research, and today I'm going to be presenting the budget for Department of Children and Families. So here on page 1, very familiar with this, the top of the page gives the overarching programs for DCF. The middle of the page shows you that the last couple of years of actuals, their current approved amount, and the agency's request for the current and budget year. Bottom of the page shows the agency request as a percentage of the statewide total. So as we're talking about DCF, we're talking about 1/25 of the pie that is state budget. Flipping forward to page 2 is the list of everything we're going to be talking about today. Page 3 shows you a nice 10-year expenditure history for this agency. It's got a nice line graph on it. An increase over the past 10 years. The top line is all funds. So of course there's a lot of jump there is changes in federal funding that's available. But as for the SGF increase, which is the blue line, it's that bottom line. There's a small hump in 2020. That year included starting funding for the CWIS project. It also included adding funding for Family First Prevention Services Act, expanding the adoption assistance payments, and caseloads. And then the increase through 24 includes a large salary adjustment approved by the legislature, developing a foster care therapeutic program, and adding funding for evidence-based services for delinquent youth. And then in 25, I think there was, that was the first year of the revised case management contracts for foster care providers, which increased caseload expenditures, but theoretically it's going to provide a more stable rate moving forward. And then beyond that, there's additional items in this past fiscal year, so in 25, that get explained later on page 10. And then of course, 26 and 27 there do include enhancement and supplemental requests in that graph. The next several pages is where you're going to see all the expenditures broken down by major purpose, category, classification, program, fund, etc. And what's really important to remember here is that all of this data that KLRD reviews is connected to the budgeting system that agencies use, and it's all connected within this document. So I don't want to get stuck in the trees. If you've got a specific question, if a number jumps out at you that you have concerns with, definitely let me know. I'm happy to talk about it offline. But for today, the meat of today's conversation is really going to begin on page 10. So we're going to jump to that. And so page 10 is going to give you the current year analysis. So line 1 is showing you that at the end of last session, with the final appropriations bill passed, DCF was approved for just over $1 billion in all funds, with about $465 million in state general fund. This number includes all that this body approved last year with the statewide pay plan and the statewide SGF operations lapse. It also includes various one-time expenditures, which are listed in the bullets below. And what's important to remember here is that any of the items that get talked about today and future days can be one-time or ongoing. It's completely a decision that rests in the hands of this committee. I once had a legislator explain it to me this way, and they said that if you want something to be one time, it's because you want that, that agency or that entity to come back and ask for it again. You want them to come back and give you an update, and so that's why you specifically say that you want it one time. This is particularly going to be important to remember because tomorrow you're going to hear public testimony all related to this budget and hear what their asks are. It's also important that when you are considering to make a motion regarding this budget or regarding any of the asks that you see, definitely work with revisers or myself on how you want to put that money in the bill. There's all sorts of pros and cons for how you put the money in the bill. And so depending on what your aims are and what your objectives are, we will put that in the bill differently. So definitely be talking to one of us to think about that as you consider adding funding. But I digress. Back to the table. So items 2 and 3, those are all reappropriations. Line 2 is showing you the full amount of money that was unspent by the agency in 25 and by law reappropriated into 26. And then line 3 is showing you that those reappropriated dollars were also subject to 1.5% lapse. So if you're good at mental math, you're recognizing that 117,000 is not 1.5% of 7.8 million. And that's because that language last year that did that operations lapse, it did exclude caseloads, it excluded things like other assistance, so provided directly to entities or individuals. So when DOB and the agency and KLRD, when we get together and we figure out what that 1.5% lapse is, this is the number that was agreed to. That is 1.5% of what was eligible to be lapsed. So below that, you have what we're calling approved subtotal with reappropriations. And then beneath that, you've got the 5 supplemental requests. These are the requests that the agency is making in the current year. Again, thinking about timelines, the budget for fiscal year 26 was originally submitted by the agency all the way back in September of 24. So when they submitted in September of 24, we go through the legislative session, and now this fall they've submitted what's called the revised estimate. So they're coming forth with additional asks. They've fine-tuned their budget for the current year, and that's what you're seeing here. So moving down the list, number 4 is that the list is that the agency is asking for funding to make several technology upgrades to the key system to help improve the SNAP payment error rate, which I know you have heard lots about. KEYS is that Kansas eligibility and enforcement system. It's used for various medical and social service programs. And in conversation with the agency, my understanding is that this request is basically the payment to Accenture to develop and implement a variety of tech changes that are listed. I think it's on page 11, maybe 11 or 12, for purposes of addressing the SNAP payment error rate. And this, of course, is going to all tie back to H.R. 1, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, which implements a cost-sharing program between the feds and the state for food stamps. And happy to answer questions on that. I know the agency's coming up after me, and they can give you all the details you would like on that. Item 5 is also tied to the agency addressing some of the stuff in H.R. 1. In a nutshell, it relates to the employment and trading program of SNAP. So H.R. 1 expanded the number of Kansas SNAP recipients will have to do work requirements to get their benefits. And so currently DCF has 19 non-supervisory individuals who act as case managers for about 1,100 people per month. And so with H.R. 1, they're thinking that they're going to have maybe an additional 800 people per month participating in those work programs. And so they want to add approximately 32 FTE. Item 6 is an ask for funding to help the agency terminate their employment verification services contract. I think this is the one with Equifax, and it's shared between KDHE and then several of the DCF programs. And my understanding is KDHE is discontinuing the use of the contract for their purposes, and so DCF had to look at what it would look like for them to consider or to continue that contract. And what they're reporting back is that one of the programs, child support services, they have a different federal option that's available to them, but that foster care and then economic and employment services would be left in the lurch with this contract being ended. And so they could stay in the contract, but they estimate it's going to cost them about $8 million to stay in the contract. Or there's this ask, which is just under $400,000, that would make it more cost effective. It would allow them to terminate the contract and then seek an alternative. Number 7 in the list is the agency's ask to strictly address operating cost increases. So in previous years, the agency would have a variety of cost savings across the agency, and that would help cover these. But now they're just coming forth and asking for it plainly, particularly in light of reappropriations being lapsed. Number 8, hopefully sounds familiar to some of you. This was an ask last year. So beginning with COVID and after, the agency had a lot of success using Amazon Connect. It allows all sorts of things, voicemail, voice calls over the internet. It also proved really helpful for them to reroute calls to available staff so they wouldn't have lags because of unreturned calls. And it also helps the Kansas Protection Report Center for the overnight and weekend calls that they get. And so the original contract had ended this, and this is the all funds that would, or sorry, this is $195,000 all funds to cover the inflationary increase to continue that contract. Lastly, items 9 and 10 in the table reflect other changes. Item 9, it's just indicating there's going to be 2 new funds in the bill, or there is 2 new funds in the bill. One is that moving forward, the agency is going to have its own SGF account for caseloads rather than taking from the other accounts that they currently have. It's not altering costs or anything, it's just a mechanics issue to make it cleaner. And same is true for the summer EBT admin account. Again, not a change, just tweaking the mechanics of it. And then item 10 is just showing that, as always, agencies, particularly with agencies that receive a lot of federal funding, there can be a lot of fluctuations in what's expected versus what is received. And so in the current year, the agency's revised estimate is about $9.2 million in all other funds, so not SGF, which is about less than 1% above the approved amount. Now, before I stand for questions, Chair, on that current year, can I have your permission to go ahead and review the governor's recommendation?
Please do.
Okay. So now you want to have the white sheet in one hand, which is the budget summary for the current year, and then you're going to want to take a look at this yellow sheet of paper. And at this point, it's going to be really helpful. Before we get into this, if you have a pen, I'm definitely going to do it to mine. So if you want to start, so fiscal year 2026, it says Amazon Connect contract increase. This document is great. The people that created it are awesome. It's just not numbered, and it gets really hard to refer to things, so I'm just going to number mine down the list real quick. That way, as we're talking, it's a little bit easier to find where we're at, and I'm going to restart in 27.
Amanda, you want to read off what you're writing down so we are all on the same page, please?
Just writing down numbers so I don't get lost here. So once you go through, so in 26, if you number down the list, you get down to 8 items total. And then if you start again in 27, there's 1, 2, 3 on the front page. And then if I flip over, I go 4 through 12. That's going to be helpful as we keep going. Okay. So remember that in the State Budget Committee, there was this global motion that was made that deleted all supplementals and enhancements. So everything that I just described on the white sheet of paper is not currently in the legislative appropriations bill, which is why on the far left column in the yellow sheet, you're going to see that the item is not included in the SBC recommendation. Now in the middle, you can see the governor's bill, which is in the middle there. And that's why you see add before every item, because what she did is added back all of the supplemental requests. In her bill, she included those. Now, there's a couple of important things to point out about this. One is the numbers that you see on the yellow sheet are not always going to match the numbers you see on the white sheet, even though it's the same item. Why? This can be for a couple different reasons, depending on the item. It could be, as is the case on this first item, it says Amazon Connect contract increase. The governor's bill recommended that item, but only for a limited amount of time. I think it's 6 months. So in the agency request on the white one, the numbers you see there were full year. She came back with her recommendation and said, okay, you have that item, but only at 6 months. And so that's why those numbers differ. This is also the case for number 6 on the yellow sheet, the SNAP employment and training caseload increases. So in her bill, she only recommended 3 months of additional funding in the current year and using existing FTE, whereas the ask on the white sheet has a full year and 32 FTE. So one way to think about it is that the yellow sheet maybe is a more up-to-date estimate for all of these items. If you're thinking about adding back one of these items or deleting one of these items, however you want to look at it, the numbers in the yellow sheet are going to be kind of the current state. Another reason, though, why the numbers could be different is because the governor's office, when they finalize their recommendation, they have a lot more current data than what's submitted by the agency in September. So that's the case for the example, for an example on the indices increase, which is number 2 in the list for 26. So on that particular item, there were some charges by OITS that the agency wasn't aware of when they submitted their budget. And so once they worked with the governor, they finalized those numbers, and those are the numbers for the indice increases, which you'll notice are quite a bit different than what you see on the white sheet. Okay, the other important thing to note on the yellow sheet is there are a few items on here that are included in the governor's recommendation that are nowhere to be found on the agency request or the bill introduced by the legislature. So these are new items. So on the yellow sheet, that's going to be items 3, which says KEYS upgrade, and item number 7, stabilizing foster care in Area 7, Sedgwick County. Ooh, there's a big O typo. County. So both of those items are what we consider brand new items. Item 3, it's a separate KEYS upgrade from anything that's talked about in our budget summary. My understanding is that this particular item is more about kind of general crucial software upgrades rather than extra asks going to Accenture to help with the particular problem with the payment error rate and things that they can do to improve that. It's just a separate item, separate thing. And then, oh yeah, and then item 7 on the yellow sheet is another additional item, stabilizing foster care in Sedgwick County. Here, the agency is coming forth and saying that while the overall need for foster care is declining in the state, there is an increase that's happening in Sedgwick County. I did a quick look before this meeting. So back in 2018, DCF reported about 1,600 in the Wichita region who are in foster care placement outside of their home. Now, in 2025, that number has grown to about 1,800. So the ask here is for some additional intensive in-home support to help reunify children back to their home. And then there's also some money in that that's for Ember Hope, which is the case management provider down in Wichita, for them to add an additional 4 therapists to work with children with high needs. Okay, that's it for the current year, Chair. Would you like me to stand for questions or move on?
Just one technical question first. So, Amanda, when you were talking about numbering these, you just want us to number these 1 to 7, or do you want us to take the corresponding number from the white sheet to put on the yellow sheet?
That would make too much sense. I just did mine 1 through 8 and then 1 through 12, just so I could easily reference back. It's frustrating that they don't line up.
Yeah, you lost me there for a minute, but if it's
Sorry.
whatever, that's fine. Okay, committee, any questions? Representative Carpenter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Amanda. So on the 2027, on the governor's budget, the indices, down at the bottom there. So it's 2.8 all funds, 1.8 SGF for 2027. So it's got, general fund is 2.7 and $1 million worth of all funds federal. So on the one on the regular budget, on the bottom of page 15, it has 1.5 million all funds, $1 million SGF. So I'm struggling with why that percentage is not the same. You see what I'm saying? So if I was going to take that, I'd look at that. It would be 500,000 federal money and $1 million SGF. And if I translate that out here, it doesn't translate to the same percentage.
Chair, Representative, I do see what you're saying. You're alluding to that the split is different between SGF and all other funds, between what the agency originally submitted and then what is in the governor's budget. My guess is that depending on what the charge is, depends on how they can claim that cost, whether or not they can claim it with their federal partners, or whether it only has to be SGF. Additionally, there is additional things that are asked for in those indices increases because they did revise their budget when they worked with the governor, so that's part of it. So it's kind of a twofold thing. If the agency can't give a better explanation, I'm happy to follow up afterwards.
That's fine. And then, Mr. Chairman, so, and then the 32 employees in the SNAP work requirements, did you say that there was already 18 employees in that department doing that work? Maybe I missed. There should be, I would think there's somebody in that department already doing that kind of work because we do have some work requirements.
Yes, Chair and Representative. So currently my understanding is they have 19 non-supervisory individuals. They act as case managers for that program, and they work with about 1,100 people per month.
Each one?
No. I think, my understanding is that total, those 19 individuals work with 1,100,
People a month or something like that.
whatever the split is, yeah.
Okay. And we want 32 new ones?
My understanding is that they are interested in adding 32 additional FTE to address what they're expecting to be about maybe 800 people more per month.
Yeah, that really doesn't add up to me very well, but maybe there's a better explanation when we get there. 800 more people. First, there's 18 doing, how many, 18 doing now?
They have 19 individuals covering 1,100 people per month. I can't do the mental math on that to tell you how many clients is averaged for each of those individuals. And there we go, okay. And so they expect maybe another 800 people participating in the program. And so they want to add approximately 32 FTE.
Yeah, that doesn't make any sense. There might be an error there. No, they're adding 32 more people. Is that, am I misspeaking? It's on top of the 18, there's 32 more people to take care of 800 more people. Okay. Yeah, all right. Maybe the department will give us some clarification on this. Sorry about that. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Committee, any other questions? Okay, want to move into, do you have a question, Representative Ballard?
Okay, moving forward to 27. So now we are looking page 14 on the white budget summary. So this is for the budget year that's going to start July 1st. At the top of the table, we're starting with the amount approved last session for our current fiscal year, and then we're backing out any one-time costs. So for DCF, that includes some SGF for Envision, some extra funding for Kansas Big Brothers Big Sisters, and then for the Cerebral Palsy Research Foundation. It also includes backing out some funding for software licenses that were paid for with ARPA interest. And that one is important to keep in mind because as moving down the list, as we go through the enhancements, you can see item 5 on the enhancement list, that software license where they are looking to use SGF rather than the ARPA interest money. But moving through the enhancement list, items 2 and 3 should look familiar. They're the same projects that I described in the current year. However, this ask is the ongoing cost, and so should those be included, that would be an ongoing cost. Number 2 is the maintenance cost to keep the software changes, and number 3 is to keep that increased staffing. These are all ongoing costs. Okay, number 4 in the list, certainly the source of a lot of chatter this year. So historically, while food stamps themselves were 100% federal dollars, the cost to administer the program was split 50-50 with the feds. That gets a little murky in recent years because there was some public health additional federal money that allowed for 100% of those administrative costs to be reimbursed. But with HR 1, beginning October 1st of this year, of 26, the state will be on the hook for 75% of the administrative cost. DCF estimates that this translates to about $12.1 million needed for the last 3 quarters of state fiscal year 27 and approximately $16.4 million SGF per year in the out years. So in the table, you are seeing red numbers where the agency is no longer using all other funds, or in this case federal funds, for this item. And instead, we'll be using SGF, which is why it's a black number in the SGF column. Number 5 on the list is that current software license that I mentioned earlier. So this is a software, my understanding, that integrates with KEYS and allows users real-time information regarding caseloads and a client status across multiple programs. I do want to clarify, though, to my understanding, this isn't necessarily a strict case of SGF being asked for to replace a shiny expenditure that was made with COVID dollars. Rather, this is what the agency was using bits of reappropriation over the years to first get this software integrated into KEYS with Accenture. And now that it's there, they have the individual license costs for all the users. And so last year, this body allowed some interest earned on ARPA to pay for it, but that was only for 1 year. And so now the agency is back in 27 saying, we still want this, we need SGF to pay for it. Number 6 is related to regional lease increases for their regional offices. I think the agency operates over about 30 service centers across the state. Number 7, again, back to the indices and the operating cost increases. This is the same as the current year. Number 8 is the Amazon Connect contract that I discussed earlier. And then number 9 is the agency asking for just under $1 million to issue an RFP to contract with 12 public health nurses across the state who could respond when DCF gets a call for a family in need of assessment, where DCF recognizes that their children protection specialists, investigators, may not have the best expertise when handling a family with a child under the age of 1. And so they'd like to try a multidisciplinary approach, and so that is what that funding is for. Lastly, in the table, beneath other changes, you can see that again in fiscal year 27, there's going to be the 2 new SGF accounts for accounting purposes. And then in all other adjustments, line 11 describes the decrease in funds again due to the fluctuation in federal grants, but that's also slightly offset. There is an increase of 1.1 million SGF compared to what the agency was approved for in the current year. And that change is just the result, the change that the budget cost indices produced each year by Department of Administration includes things like group health and capers. So it's kind of a mandatory payment. I'm done with the budget year analysis. Can I go over the governor's recommendations now? Okay, so pulling out the yellow sheet again. Okay, I got mine all numbered all the way down to 12. Okay. So same rules apply as earlier. So everything on the white sheet in the budget year 27 was deleted as a part of the global motion made by SBC, but then the governor's recommendation includes all of those items. So that's why they're on the yellow sheet. But again, they might be at a different price point as they kind of got refined through process. Specific to 27, there are a couple things we want to point out. First is going to be on the back page, it should be number 4, Kansas Office of Early Childhood Transition. Here, several DCF programs are being lapsed out of the DCF budget and then being added back in a new section of the bill for Office of Early Childhood. My understanding is that maybe the first week of February, this committee is actually going to hear that agency's budget presentation, so same thing I'm doing today. And so it will detail kind of all of those costs. But what you're seeing here is that, yes, the governor did lapse the money out of DCF because they put it in that new committee. The last item there to point out, item 12, last thing there, summer EBT language. That's just it's a language difference. So in the legislature's bill that they introduced, the funding associated with administering the summer EBT program, it's in its own account and it does not have any reappropriations language. So any money left over will automatically get lapsed, barring any interagency transfers. In the governor's recommendation, it allowed for reappropriations in that account, but then added a subsection that requires the lapse of any remaining or unencumbered money. So it's kind of more or less the same thing as my understanding, but if it's a cause for concern for anyone, let me know and I'm happy to do additional digging, or certainly revisers can chime in. Okay, I think that's done. I'm done, Chair. Any questions?
Representative Ballard.
No, it wasn't. My apologies. Thank you.
Close. So number 4, projects to reduce SNAP error rate. That is based on the payment error rate that's going to impact how we pay for benefits beginning in fiscal year 28. That is separate from, if you're looking at the yellow sheet, where's it at? Number 8 on the back side where it says SNAP administrative match. It's also, it looks like, oh, maybe she meant number 4 on the white sheet. SNAP administrative match. That's a separate piece of SNAP that HR 1 impacts. That's saying that now the state of Kansas is going to be on the hook for 75% of the administrative costs, whereas previously it was 50-50. Yes, that's correct. Chair, sorry, one more moment to clarify. So again, just keeping in mind, those are always two separate things. The payment error rate is going to impact benefits, how much the state of Kansas has to pay for benefits. Previously, that was always federal dollars, 100%. Now, based on that payment error rate, we're going to be on the hook, but not until 28. So you don't see any of the change in expenditures. That's one piece. That is separate from the administrative cost piece. That's another part in HR 1 in the One Big Beautiful Bill. That's saying that instead of it being a 50-50 with the feds for administering the program, the states are on the hook for 75% of that cost, and that begins in state fiscal year 27, October 1st of 26.
Representative Ballard.
I want to follow up. So, but we have a year extension, well, not extension, but it's a year, 27, before we have to make the payment on the error rate, right? They allowed us that year. We don't have to make it now.
Chair and Representative, correct. So it's not the payment we will have to make related to the payment error rate is not until fiscal year 28. And it's federal fiscal year, so that would be October 1st of 27, which is not included anywhere in the budget that you see before you. Yeah.
So then, if we reduce that error rate, we went from 9, because it's 6 is acceptable. So if we reduced it to that, then the amount of money we owed would have to pay, would be reduced. Am I correct?
Chair and Representative, yes, she's alluding to the right thing. So if we get that payment error, if DCF gets that payment error rate down below 6, the state won't be on the hook for anything.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Wolcott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick follow-up there on that one, number 4 on the white sheet. You'd made the comment that it's where the state now incurs 75% versus previously 50%. So does that mean that our administrative costs are about $48 million a year for SNAP? Is my math adding up there? If 25% is only $12 million,
Sorry, thank you, Chair and Representative. I think it's closer to 66 million, and the reason why is that 12 million that you're seeing in the table is only for 3/4 of a year.
Representative King.
Thank you, Chair. Amanda, on the yellow sheet, on the back page, number 4, Kansas Office of Early Education Transition, can we assume that those were dollar for dollar move from the one agency into creating the new agencies and no new dollars and no new FTEs there?
Chair, my understanding is that dollar for dollar, yes, that will get presented the second week or first week of February a little bit more closely. There was an FTE change, one FTE change, but that'll all get brought up in February.
Thank you, Amanda. Thank you, Chair.
Committee, any other questions? I am not looking forward to the day that this is discussed in appropriations. I'll just say that right now for the record. Okay, so.
Thank you, Chair. And the good news is we have a lot of great people behind me that will answer all of your questions. They are fantastic individuals, including the Secretary, Laura Howard.
Madam Secretary, are you ready? Welcome to committee. I see you again.
Thank you. Great to see the committee for the first time this year. a little earlier than normal, but I don't mind. So, yeah, thank you. Amanda did a great job talking about our budget, and my presentation, it'll focus on a lot of things she talked about, but I am going to spend some time fairly early on just talking a bit more about HR1 so that those elements are understood, and then linking that to the actual budget pieces. So you'll see, if you've been on this committee before, as you all have, much of this looks familiar in terms of just the way we focus our presentation. So I'll skip over to page 4, which again, just reminding you about our organization, where we have 4 major programs. We have 36 regional offices, and then, of course, our central office. So just a reminder, one of our largest programs managed through our regional offices is the Economic and Employment Services. That's going to include all those SNAP pieces that we're going to talk in more detail about. It also includes TANF, currently includes childcare. That will change. Employment assistance, utility assistance. And so, again, we'll talk a bit more about that. The second program, Prevention and Protection Services, which is the majority of the state general fund in our budget is in prevention and protection. You can really think about this as child welfare, the front end services, the prevention services that we do, family preservation, family first, foster care and adoption, and independent living services. Our third program is rehabilitation services. This is a program that provides a variety of services around individuals with disabilities and supporting them to work. This is heavily federally financed. The VR services are about 78% federal funds, 21% state funds. Also includes our services for persons who are blind, including the blind employment programs. And then we also do the disability determination services on behalf of the Social Security Administration for Kansas. And that's actually 100% federally funded. So again, rehabilitation services, we don't tend to talk about that as much, I think primarily because it has so few state dollars attached to it. Then the fourth program is child support services. So again, we're the agency that helps children get the financial support necessary, and by establishing parentage and orders for child support, locating non-custodial parents, forcing child support orders, modifying those child support orders. That's funded about 2/3 federally, 1/3 state funds, and that's really done through contracts. Page 9, you can see our regional offices and our 6 regions, so 36 service centers across 6 regions of the state. All right, I really wanted to spend some time on HR1 because it impacts so much what we have, what we're asking for in our budget. So HR1, the federal fiscal year 25 budget reconciliation bill, sometimes called the One Big Beautiful Bill, signed into law on July 4th, makes a lot of changes to the SNAP program. I have to tell you, in all my years, I never thought I'd be talking about SNAP so much because it was like a totally federally funded benefits program. Not something we really spend a lot of time on. So the Big Beautiful Bill does several things, and Amanda's done a good job of talking about a couple of things that really can impact the budget. The first, for every state, it changes the state share of SNAP administrative costs from 50% to 75%, effective October 1st of 2026. This has nothing to do with state performance. I mean, this is literally just a cost shift that the federal government is placing on the states. I mean, that's all it is, nothing to do with performance. So when that takes effect, in October, that will be 3/4 of the state fiscal year. So we estimate the annualized cost of that change each year will be about $16.4 million. But because you'll only experience it for 3/4 of this next fiscal year, in the first year, the budget you're working on now for next year, that'll be a $12.1 million impact. And again, no connection to payment error rates, no connection to performance. And I might say, in terms of costs associated with administration, those are our field staff who do all of the eligibility work, the folks who do the quality control work to look at, how well the eligibility work is performed. It's the work around the actual eligibility system, the key system that we share with KDHE that connects to the SNAP portion of that. It's the funding that goes to the financial intermediary who does the electronic benefit cards to get the benefits on people's cards. So those are just examples of the things that make up the administrative costs for the program. And just a context for SNAP, I mean, maybe I should have started with this. You never see the benefit side of SNAP, or you never have before, because that's an off-budget item. It doesn't actually show up in the state budget. We put it on charts for you, but it shows up as an off-budget item. In Kansas, $427.4 million in SNAP benefits a year go out to about 186,000 Kansans. So that's $427 million going out through benefit cards, being spent at grocery stores, significant economic impact. So the first piece is the administrative cost to do with that. The feds are shifting 25% of that onto all states. Again, we think the first year impact will be $12.1 million for 3/4 of the year, $16.4 million after that. You see that in our budget request and in the governor's recommendation. The second piece that H.R. 1 does is to begin to establish criteria under which states would have to pay a portion of those benefit costs. So that $427 million, that's our current case, so that current amount of benefits, as I said today, it's 100% federal. Based on our state's performance in what's called a payment error rate, and every state's performance, states might have to pay a portion of that, again, starting in fiscal year 28. So on page... the next page, page 11, it just gave you a little bit more detail about that. So what the bill does is if states have a payment error rate under 6%, the state match would be 0. It would continue to be all federally funded. And again, a payment error rate, that's not a measure of fraud. That's really a measure of how accurately eligibility is determined. And errors can happen. Those can be staff errors. Those can be client errors. Those can be overpayments or underpayments in those calculations. If a state ends up with a payment error rate of 6 to 7.9, the state match would be 5%, 8 to 9.9%, 10%, and 10% or higher, 15%. And we just, based on our current caseload, that $400 and some million, you could see that given you a range here of zero to $62 million a year, depending upon error rates. Historically, Kansas has had error rates less than 6%, many times in the last 20 years. But most states, and you can kind of see the national trend, in the context of COVID, in the context of the federal government, stopping certain verifications, allowing more things to happen remotely during COVID. We see the national trend for payment error rates going up. Kansas was no exception. We had a rate as high as 12%. Then in federal fiscal year 24, we dropped down to 9.98%, which was slightly below the national average, obviously not nearly enough where we need to be. As we look at the current federal fiscal year 25 that we currently have been measuring, the cumulative amount for that year through August was just over 9%. And if we look at the most recent months, as we measure our error rate, our average for the last 4 months has been 7%, and our average in the most recent month we have data has been 5.5%. So we're working very hard. It's not simple work. It's staff training, changing policies around places where you see the errors occurring. It's a variety of activities going on around that. But one of the things you will see us ask for in the budget that Amanda talked about is some technology tools, and I'll talk more about those, that would help us on an ongoing basis to reduce that error rate more. As simple as, the kinds of things of not having, if you have some automatic document processing, then you don't misenter data, or things that are like a bot that would actually help our staff on maybe complicated things like utility costs or shelter costs to understand where an error might be coming before we actually experience it. So again, and I'll say this again, we're really asking for that resource. We're working very hard with the tools we have. We brought in consultants. We're obviously making progress, continue to do that. But I also know that this isn't just about the work that my team does right now. This is a permanent change. And so for the state to consistently be able to get the error rate down, not experience those costs, we think some of those technology tools we're asking for are smart investments, to minimize or eliminate the possibility of those costs. So again, that's the payment error rate. Depends on state performance. And again, as Amanda said, that will first hit in federal fiscal year 28. The year that just started in October will be the year that is critical for us to perform in. That will be the year that's measured for that first time. And again, we have some delays and lags by the time quality control happens, so we're usually 4 or 5 months behind. So it'll still be a couple months before we even know where we were for October. But as I said, for the last 4 months of data, we've gotten it down to an average of 7%, and the very last month of data, which goes back to July or August, we were down to 5.5% for that month. So again, working hard on that. I hope that helps just to understand sort of, what the requirements are and then what the impact could be if we don't get those error rates down on the state's budget. The SNAP, the HR one also, so first it shifted administrative costs. Second, it said we're going to make states pay for some of the benefits if you don't get your error rates down. The third thing it did was say we're going to require more SNAP beneficiaries to work. So several features there. Raise the age of able-bodied adults who must participate from 60 to 64. That's a group we call the ABODs, able-bodied adults without dependents. It's about 6,900 persons. There has been a work exemption federally for parents with kids under 18. That was reduced down to kids under 14. That's another 10,300 persons. It also removes work exemptions that were in place for a number of categories, people who are homeless, kids aging out of foster care, and some older youth, and some veteran populations. That's almost 3,800. So in total, that's about 21,000 more who would be required to fulfill the work requirements. And what those work requirements mean is if the individuals aren't working a certain number of hours a week, then they could only receive SNAP for 3 months out of a 36-month period. So, meeting those work requirements means that they can continue to meet their SNAP eligibility. We historically find that about 9% of those who have to meet work requirements utilize our work services to support them. And I think we had some numbers earlier. Our number is that an additional 1,900 adults will participate in the work program. So, and then when Amanda was talking, I think there was maybe some confusion about what that increase was, and in terms of the number of staff we were asking for. But it will be an additional, we think, just under 2,000 adults to participate in the program. A couple other changes that happened in HR 1 that you don't maybe see as directly connected to the budget. Some changes around eligibility for individuals who are not citizens or not permanent residents. So in the past, certain individuals who had had refugee status or asylee status could receive SNAP for limited periods of time. That's been changed in the bill. That will remove eligibility for about 4,000 persons. They also got rid of the SNAP education program, a contract we had with K-State that states had, and then make some changes that result in reductions of benefits related to how energy assistance and internet costs are calculated. And we think that'll impact about 58,000 households with a modest reduction. So again, those are the changes that are in the bill. I mean, obviously, I'm most focused on the administrative costs, the payment error rate, and the work requirements. So as I said on the payment error rate, we have already implemented a number of process and policy changes. I mean, one good example might be, we've done a lot of assessment, and for example, we could find through our quality control that a lot of the errors were occurring related to shelter costs. So we put in some more provisions up front. We're asking for more verification at the front end around shelter costs to reduce that. We've changed things around our supervisor case review system. So a number of issues related and focus on staff training, but again, a lot of pieces. We also have some new recommendations from a consultant that we brought on board, Human Services Group, that will lead us to implement, I think, some additional policy changes. We're going to look at those next week. So again, all hands on deck. We're working really hard on this to get that down. What we're going to be asking you for is some help with the technology pieces. That's HR 1. The second thing I wanted to reference before just getting into the budget pieces is the Comprehensive Child Welfare Information System, or CWIS. You all have heard about this system for a while. We have finally, very excited to have awarded CWIS contracts. And so we just have a couple pages talking about that. This is really to modernize our child welfare information systems, really will eliminate multiple numbers of existing systems. It will also allow interfaces between various agencies that connect with DCF's prevention and protection services, our foster care system, or our adult protective service programs. And for example, like our foster care case management providers, they will all then connect to the same system. And right now, they're operating out of their own case management system. So again, 5 legacy systems will be replaced, federal match of 50%, and on page 14, you can see the 3 contracts. The largest is with Redmayne. They, for the design, development, and implementation. And then we have various quality assurance and what we call an independent verification contract that you have with large IT contracts. The main reason I'm talking about the CWIS project with you is because at the end of the last fiscal year, because of the timing at which those contracts happened, there is some funding that we didn't get obligated, about $7.7 million in state general fund that was reappropriated. So in your sweep of reappropriations, that funding was taken away. So we would just ask you to allow us to keep that reappropriation to help us pay for the first year cost of this system. So again, it's timing, funding you had approved last year. It's really the timing of when contracts took place. So, Mr. Chairman, I then just go into the budgets, the budget summaries, and I won't spend a lot of time on these regular pie charts and things that you see. Just kind of starting in fiscal year 26. You can really see on page 16, one thing I'll call out, I will point out is as we take the Office of Early Childhood out, it changes a little bit the flavor of what our budget looks like. In fiscal year 26, we're about half federal funds, half state general fund, and you'll see that state general fund percentage jump up quite a bit in fiscal year 27. Few pandemic funds left in going from fiscal year 25 to fiscal year 26, but almost entirely done with the pandemic funds, almost closing out on the ARPA dollars within DCF. Again, the next couple of pages, I'll just kind of move through those quickly. Again, as we've said before, prevention and protection services, largest single area of our budget, just under $500 million. Also, the largest proportion of state general fund dollars on page 18, with at about $336 million out of our $500 million in the current year. And then as we sit here today, child care is actually our largest federal fund, $131 million. That will leave the DCF budget and go over to the new agency, so our largest federal fund will become TANF in the future. I'm going to switch over then to page 22, the fiscal year 26 budget. And again, I'm just going to mention this now, but I'll talk about the projects when I get through both 26 and 27, because they're really the same projects, so I don't need to talk about them twice. But in fiscal year 26, really you can see the caseload changes, and then we would ask you to consider supporting the supplementals that the governor has supported. It's a total of 5.3 million SGF in fiscal year 26. And again, that relates to the projects to reduce the error rate, the work requirements, some of those indice increases, and again, we'll reference those again. But just at a high level, we'd be asking you to restore $5.3 million and to allow us to use the reappropriation from the Comprehensive Child Welfare Information System that was lapsed. In fiscal year 27, again, this is where you begin to see the Office of Early Childhood transition. The DCF budget had gone over $1 billion. I'm on page 23, but after that transition, we'll be down to about $868 million in terms of our total budget. And again, you can see, as I had mentioned earlier, the state general fund share of our budget will increase because so much of the child care funds that are leaving are federal dollars. I have a specific page about the child care. And total transfers, 170 million. And I think that's slightly different than what Amanda said, because there's a couple transfers that go to other agencies, to education and KDHE, that show up in different ways in the budget. But again, 150 million in federal funds, 5 million in CIF, just under 15 million in state general funds. And 29 positions that would move to the new Office of Early Childhood. All right, and then also in fiscal year 27, as we look at expenditures by program on page 25, again, you can see the prevention and protection services being that largest. Same with the general fund on page 26. But then on page 27, when we show expenditures of federal funds, TANF becomes our largest federal funding source. It will no longer be the Child Care and Development Block Grant, which was about $130 million. We show expenditures of about $83 million from TANF here, and that will be our largest federal funding source in our budget. I'm going to skip some of these pie charts and just get over to the FY27 budget changes on page 30. Just at a high summary level, again, the submitted budget, the consensus caseload items, then we show the Office of Early Childhood transfer, that $170 million, about $15 million SGF. And then the governor has recommended $21.9 million SGF in enhancements. That includes the shift for the administrative costs of SNAP. And on the next page, we show you all of those items. And again, Amanda's talked about all these, but I'd like to touch on some of them that I think are maybe most critical to spend a little bit of time on. Our number one priority are those projects to reduce the SNAP error rate. As I said, we're doing a lot through training, through policy changes, through supervisory work, through our quality control work, but we think there are some specific tools that are automation tools that could help to reduce that error rate and help to sustain that, over time. As I said, it's not really just about what we do for the first year. It's about being able to maintain that error rate below 6% on a permanent, ongoing basis, no matter what's happening with staff turnover or things like that. So that first item, which is projects to reduce the SNAP error rate, as I said, the governor supported 1.4 million SGF in the current year, about 2.8 million all funds, a little less in the out year, really letting us to go ahead and get started quickly this year. And a couple of these, I think there's going to be an LPA report that comes out related to this, I think tomorrow or the next day. They also reference a couple of these automation issues and really recommend that the agency move forward with those items. So we've listed what those are on page 33, still on the projects to reduce the SNAP error rate. And again, I won't go through all of these in detail unless you want me to, but they're all pieces that have to do with avoiding errors that technology could help us to not do. I mean, one example would be the third one down, the quality assurance application. I referenced that earlier. I mean, it's really like a chatbot assistant that would really help our staff, really give staff the rules they need very quickly for processing the SNAP food assistance applications. Maybe they're struggling with some issues, say, to do with utility costs and what to include there. The SNAP manual is nearly 700 pages long. And so again, just a tool to help the eligibility pieces. Yeah, it's complicated. SNAP eligibility is incredibly complicated. So again, there's a couple of examples like that. One of the others has to do with communications with clients, because again, some of these error rates are staff, some are clients. We've actually gotten the staff rates down quite a bit to less than 50% of the errors, but some of these others are tools to help us better communicate things with clients to avoid some of their errors. So again, a series of things over the 2 fiscal years. These are all funds dollars on this page, but about 1.6 million SGF in 26, just under $1 million in 27. And again, when I think about this, I know those are real dollars, but when I think about the cost of not getting the payment error rate down, those are even so much substantially more. So we'd ask for your support with those tools. The second item is a fiscal year 27 item, going back to that SNAP administrative rate. I think we've talked about that quite a bit already. This is just a federal cost shift. $12 million SGF in 27, about just over $16 million as we go to the fiscal years after that. And I've had folks say, well, if you didn't get the money, what would you do? We'd have to reduce the eligibility staff who do that work, which I think then would impact our ability to meet that payment error rate. So it's a little bit of a catch-22. Again, it's simply a cost shift, and I would ask that you support that. All right, the third piece related to SNAP had to do with the employment and training work requirement changes. I talked to you earlier about that there would be an estimated additional 1,951 adults who would participate in the program. And I think we currently show about 1,400 work participants. This would more than double the current work participants. We're not asking for the FTE. We'll use existing vacant FTE positions, but we are asking for the funding to support about 32 staff doing that work, phased in for 3 months in the current fiscal year and for a full year in fiscal year 27. So again, a couple pages explaining that one. The next one I wanted to talk about on page 37 has to do with the employment verification services. And you all have spent quite a bit of time, I think, as a committee, and some other committees have, on the Equifax contract. Some things happened federally a year or so ago where Medicaid agencies now have the ability to access an employment verification service at no cost through the federal agency. What that means is the current Equifax contract, which is shared with KDHE and DCF, becomes really unmanageable for us as an agency from a cost perspective if Medicaid is not a part of that. There are certain fixed costs in that. I think as Amanda said, I mean, that would shift about $8 million cost onto us as an agency. So we've asked for a small amount of money in the current year as we move to terminate that contract. And then we currently have an RFP on the street for a new vendor, and we would anticipate living within our existing budget in the out year. So this is a request just for fiscal year 26 as we try to move out of that contract. So anyway, that's what that is. Page 38, this is key system upgrade. This is also a system that we share with Medicaid. KEYS is the eligibility system for Medicaid and all of the DCF eligibility programs. That program needs upgrades to a more modern software version to support the system and to mitigate some security vulnerabilities. You know, and sometimes in the past, what we have done is use reappropriations to fund these, but with reappropriations being swept the last year or so, and also not being able to use salary savings, we've really had to come forth and ask for a number of these administrative pieces. My understanding is that KDHE has the resources for their share in their budget. We don't. And so again, we're asking you for that funding in the current year and the out year for an upgrade of the KEYS eligibility system. You can see on page 39 some of the things that upgrade will do, both from a worker feature and a consumer feature. And again, I won't go over all of those, but it is there for your information in terms of what that upgrade will do. On page 40, the next item is the workload management software. As Amanda said, last legislative session, the governor had recommended funding for this for DCF, and the legislature supported that, but shifted the funding kind of late in the session to some funding that was available through ARPA interest. That meant that it didn't become a part of our base, so we only ended up having it as one-time funding, even though it is ongoing in terms of the licenses that are required. This is the same system that KDHE uses to manage Medicaid caseload, and that's part of the reasons we thought it was so attractive. As I think many of you know, we've had some challenges keeping up with some workload pieces, and I think KDHE had some really, really good experience with the current with this current workload management software that it's called. And so, again, you supported it last year, but that ended up only being on a one-time basis because of the shift to the ARPA interest. So we would just ask that you continue to support that through the SGF that would be necessary to continue that. On page 41, we have costs associated with some of our leases in terms of increased costs related to regional leases. And so again, in past years, we might have used used higher shrinkage to create savings or use reappropriations, but the current legislative policy doesn't let us shift any salary savings to anything like this. So that's partly why you see so many of these requests this year. We've been able to manage many of those things ourselves, but with some of those resources being swept, we don't have the flexibility to do that. Related item on page 42 are the various indice increases. These are the costs that Department of Administration and the Office of Technology Services charges to other state agencies. It essentially funds their operations and funds the costs of these services. We've seen large increases, about a 50% increase from the accounting, payroll, and budget system. New charges from OITS. And so again, these are just the increases in those costs. About $2.2 million all funds in the current year, $2.8 million in the out year. So again, a little under $2 million SGF in the out year. And so again, the sorts of things that we might have been able to absorb through salary savings, through forcing salary savings, or through through reappropriations, but we don't have those tools anymore as an agency, and the amounts are just too high to manage within our existing budget. Couple more things, and I'll be done and be ready for questions. On page 43, this is more of a programmatic item related to stabilizing foster care in Sedgwick County. You know, Amanda talked about the number of youth in care in Sedgwick County. You know, as a statewide level, when I started this role in 2019, we had about 7,600 kids in foster care. We're now down to about 5,300 statewide, and an awful lot of that has to do with some of the prevention work. Family First and the like. We've not seen those same changes in Sedgwick County, and our contractors have been challenged with some older youth, particularly with some very challenging behaviors, and so there's a lot of things that are happening within Sedgwick County that we feel the need to support our partner, who's now Amber Hope, in trying to stabilize foster care in Sedgwick County. So again, a few small items. One of the items funded here would help Amber Hope with 4 new therapists to expand what's called behavior intervention services. They've had some great success with this model. And then also, what we're seeking to do is to add small amounts of resources related to Family Pres or Family First to actually use those kinds of front-end services for youth who are in care to help support them going home. So again, about $436,000 in the current year, $800,000 in the out year. But again, just to put a little bit more of a laser focus on Sedgwick County and how we can help that county and the youth in that county. Almost done. Page 44, Amazon Connect. Again, this is just a contract increase. As Amanda said, this has kind of been our virtual call center contract that's been in place kind of since the COVID time. It's really been a great contract in terms of offering clients 24/7 access to general and case-specific information, some interactive voice response features, and just various things that can be received and processed through phone operations. We have some modest increases in that contract that we requested funding that the governor supported. Last one on page 45 is another programmatic one related to child welfare, what is a nurse co-responder partnership. What we're asking for is funding for nurse co-responders to assist us in assessing child abuse reports for infants under the age of 1. During fiscal year 25, there were about 3,000 intakes assigned that included a child age 0 to 1. And child protection specialists may not have all the expertise needed as we think about youth with any chronic health needs, some child development needs. So we would use these nurse co-responders to team with our child protection specialists during the assessment to get a more multidisciplinary approach. And we've talked about this a couple times, I think, in the Child Welfare System Oversight Committee, and heard a presentation on some other states that had infused a bit of resources from the medical or nursing side to their system. So again, that's our request there. And then lastly, I just wanted to remind the committee again about the CWIS reappropriation and asking you to let us retain that $7.7 million in state general fund dollars. Just for information, we put a couple of our bills that we have for our legislative agenda, but I'll leave those for your review. And again, I would just close by just summarizing that what we would ask the committee to consider would be to support the governor's recommendation, which is summarized on page 31, about 5.3 million SGF. We'd be asking you to consider adding in the current year, about 21.9 million in fiscal year 27, which includes that $12 million administrative cost shift. And then lastly, allowing us to retain that reappropriation that would otherwise be swept to fund the CWIS system. I'll stop there, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Committee, questions? Representative Reese?
Oh, and I should say, Mr. Chair, I do have with me Deputy Secretary Tanya Keys, our Deputy Secretary for Programs, and Tammy Tompkins, our Budget Director. If I get in too much trouble here, I've got support here.
Works. Thank you.
My question's easy. Regarding the stabilizing Area 7, Sedgwick County, and the funding needed for that, or requesting for that, you mentioned how many children are in foster care now, and if you can give me that number again, and then percentage of those children residing in or coming out of Sedgwick County.
Yes, thank you. We currently have about 5,300 in care. I think that's right. Isn't that right? Yes. And about 1,800 of those are in Sedgwick County. So significant proportion are in Sedgwick County.
Thank you.
Representative Wolcott?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I might have a couple follow-ups if that's okay as we get
Sure.
into this. I remember last year and this year during your presentation, there was a lot of talk around IT upgrades or software packages. Here you referenced there's 5 legacy systems that are going to be replaced with a new one. Do we have a total number of what we spend in IT through your agency? And as we replace some of these systems, do we have kind of dollar figures of how much we actually save when we shuttle those or no longer use those systems?
We can get you the number in terms of just what our overall IT budget is. I'm happy to provide that to you. And I'd have to ask my team working on CWIS, for example. That's our biggest system in terms of what we expect as that system would come online, and the other 5 systems would go down in terms of what staff support and those things. I don't know that off the top of my head. So.
Would you be expecting some savings as we spend the dollars for new, or potentially spend dollars for new systems? Do you see some savings come from that?
I don't know. I think I'd like to ask my team. I think obviously the systems would be more efficient. The fact, the level of support required to maintain some older systems, and then also the fact that our providers, our partners would also be using the same system. I think those are all the things we'd want to assess to see what the impact has been in terms of what that looks like. We certainly know that a modernized system won't have the same level of demand in terms of like what it takes to make changes and all those kinds of things that you see in some of these legacy systems. So, yeah.
One final here. I assume, and I don't know, I guess this is a question I shouldn't really assume, do we share IT services or databases with other agencies that are maybe have duplicate information to where we can find some efficiencies with some IT?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I already referenced earlier today, for example, we share the KEYS system with KDHE related to eligibility. We also have interfaces with other agencies. For example, Department of Labor is a great example. Through their unemployment system, we have interfaces with them that allows us to access their data, so we don't have to create that data within our system. So again, there's several things like that take place, across systems. Sure.
Thank you.
Representative Ballard?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have 2 questions. I want to follow up on the TANF requirement of work requirement. All right. I didn't see it here and I haven't read all of it, but is there an age on it and how many hours a week?
So the SNAP work requirement, there were several provisions that changed. I think I kind of summarized that a little bit on page 11. But there were several things. One, in terms of the able-bodied adults, and this is SNAP we're talking about, not TANF. These are work requirements under SNAP. This would increase the age from 60 to 64, what SNAP would now define as able-bodied adults who would have to participate in those work programs. It also, in addition to just that age requirement, it would also take away some exemptions for some parents who didn't have to participate. If they had children under 18, they didn't have to participate. That will go down to children under 14. That's about 10,000 people. And then it also takes away some exemptions for persons experiencing homelessness or young adults who age out of foster care, certain veteran populations that didn't have to participate before but will be covered by those work requirements. We think, and that's about 20,000 people. And in terms of the work requirements, remind me if you can, you know.
Thank you for the question, Tanya Keys. We can get you the work requirements, the different categories. It's working, volunteering, or some training programs also would qualify, and we can get that detail to you.
20 hours a week.
Yes.
Depends on what kind of job you have.
Yeah, that's why Deputy Secretary Key said, let's just get you that piece that talks about what qualifies for meeting those requirements. So, and what happens if you don't, so, yeah.
The other thing is just a clarification. You mentioned that TANF would be the largest budget. And I think you said something about 131 million or whatever, but would you explain that again? 'Cause normally we get almost 103 million in TANF. When you said the largest budget.
Yeah, thank you, Representative. What I was talking about was we get a lot of different federal funds, and currently today, the federal child care funds, the Child Care Development Block Grant, has been the largest single federal source in our budget at about 130 million. When that goes away, the TANF Block Grant will be the largest single federal funding source we have, and as you said, that's about 104 million. On a chart here, you'll see it look like 80, but that's just about how the expenditures get made. So again, that was the point I was making, was that with the change of the Office of Early Childhood, we lose our largest single federal funding source in this agency, and TANF becomes the largest one that remains. Yeah, that's all I meant.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Oropeza?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a quick question on the nurse co-responder partnership. What happened to those 3,000 babies from 2025? Do they go directly to an emergency room?
So what thank you for the question, Representative. What the 3,000 refers to are intakes that we had in our Protection Report Center alleging child abuse or neglect. So, so again, and those were intakes that were assigned, So in other words, a report was made, it was assigned for further investigation. So, what specifically happened, it depends on the situation. Some of those investigations would have found no issue. Some of those investigations might have led to offering the family certain services, maybe home visiting services, things like that. In some cases, that might have led to a decision to file a petition related to the child coming into foster care. So, it really depends on the specific circumstance. What we're saying with regard to having that level of expertise, particularly for those youngest children, is that could really help us in terms of the effectiveness and thoroughness of our assessments when we're sort of making those determinations as to what those different pathways might be or those options might be related to that child and family.
Representative Carpenter?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I want to kind of zero in on this SNAP error rate and that kind of stuff. So you're asking us to spend $4 million. Seems to me like a lot of this stuff should already have been done or already be in it. I don't know why we would need to buy a computer program for $630,000 for software updates for automatic processing of SNAP benefits and another $780 to fund the automatic identification of cases that are higher risk. That's one thing. Then it's on the other pages, $1 million for this and that. It just seems like that ought to be happening already. And I'm disappointed that all of a sudden because the feds have came down on us that we're going to spend $6 million, including that much money, but including 32 more people to do 1,400 more or 2,000 more people. When you've got 18 doing 1,400 now, those numbers really aren't. And that's at a cost of $2.1 million on something that you, by admission, have lowered your SNAP rate down to 5.5% with existing resources. So help me understand where I'm struggling, why I'm struggling so much about spending $6 million when you've brought that rate down already with the same resources you have to manageable rate.
Yeah, thank you for the question. And I wouldn't, I mean, we're making progress on the rate, but I don't know, for example, what this next month's quality control will show. I mean, I'm really glad to be able to say, gosh, we've averaged 7% in the last few months. But the reason, and I hope we are able to continue that, but the reason we're asking for some of the technology pieces is I think just that ability to sustain that. You know, if caseloads go up, you know, at different points in time, you know, we have a recession, if we have a lot of changes in staff, you know, it takes about 14 months for an eligibility worker to really be trained, to really know everything that they should know, to really have full competency in these programs. They're very, very complex. And you'll see some of the technology pieces, Representative, also relate to some things that happened in the big, beautiful bill. So for example, you know, the first item has to do with making the changes that are needed to reflect those changes in the work requirements. If we don't get those changes made in the technology system, our staff are going to make more errors because they're going to be manually trying to apply those new rules to folks if we don't get that changed in the system. So it's a combination of technology pieces related to changes and a combination of technology pieces that that can help us to reduce sort of the manual way in which errors can happen, you know. And again, I really bring those forward because, you know, because I'm really, really cognizant that this is an ongoing permanent change federally, and every single year the state would have the risk of having significant dollars to match if that were to, you know, bump up and down. And if you look historically across the states, I mean, you see error rates going up and down, you know, despite maybe folks' best intentions. And I feel like the technology pieces, that's, I mean, in my opinion, that's an amount well spent to make it more likely that we can sustain, that we can achieve and sustain lower error rates and not have those $40 million or $20 million or $60 million in a year impact the state's budget. So
We're going to have to agree to disagree.
we'll talk more.
Representative King.
Thank you, Chair. Madam Secretary, to follow up a little bit on that, Representative Wilcott. Sorry, you're my office mate too, aren't you? You know, ask for the budget on IT. If you could you add to that the number of FTEs that are currently working in technology IT? I'd appreciate that. That'd be one. And to follow up on Representative Carpenter's line of questioning on IT a little bit, and your ask for millions more. You know, you're currently budgeting tens of millions of dollars in IT now, and some of that is going to go to ongoing maintenance items as well. So that's just a comment. I do have two questions. Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a little bit more global. Looks like your total budget for DCF is about 1.5 billion. Is that about right? All funds and SGF? If I look on the front page of the white sheet, I see about 500 million of SGF and about a billion of all funds. So would the total DCF budget be 1.5 or Amanda, Can you help me on that? What is the total DCF budget? Just a little over a billion, so the 500 million would be included in that
Yes.
billion?
Yes,
Okay.
yeah, that would be the state general fund. Right.
Okay, so a
Right.
billion, roughly $1 billion budget. How much of that do we as a state go to prevention? And how much of that is just chasing the outcomes or chasing, what the cards that we've been dealt with? Is there any prevention in there at all?
Sure. I mean, the first thing that comes to my mind when we talk about prevention, and I have to give the legislature a lot of credit, there's been a lot of investment made in the last in the last 8 years in prevention. I mean, the first thing I think about is in the realm of child welfare, where through what was called the Federal Families First Act, states were allowed to begin spending federal child welfare dollars for front-end services. So, we went in full bore as a state and have been very successful. I think as I talked about, this is one of the reasons why certainly I believe that our foster care numbers have fallen so much, across the state. So that's one area. We also spend TANF dollars in areas that I would call prevention as we seek to support families through community-based services. Also things in the child care realm related to like home visiting. So a number of things that I mean, and again, it's kind of, devil's in the detail in terms of how you might define prevention, but definitely that's been a very high priority for us as an agency, and we certainly could share those numbers with you. So.
Mr. Chair, one more question, please.
Sure, go ahead.
Thank you. Secretary, large agency, $1 billion, your average ending daily balance, do you have, when you pull down from the feds, how long does that money stay in the agency before it gets dispersed out? And do you have $100 million in your bank account, on a daily basis, or 200 million, or is it just a question on that, and then I'll have a follow-up on that.
Yeah, thank you for the question, and I may ask my budget director to speak a little bit in more detail. But we as an agency, we draw down as we need the resources. So we don't have like all of the child care development block grant for the year sitting. We draw down as we need to spend the resource, and I'll have her speak any further to that. So.
Please.
Thank you, Chair. My name's Tammy Tompkins. I'm the budget director, and we can only keep that money for 3 days before we have to have it spent. So a lot of times we actually let our federal funds go negative and then draw it down to reimburse ourselves. So I don't know. I didn't look at it today, but we do have a balance, and I can get you.
No, but you
if
can
you would
only keep
like.
it for 3 days, so.
Yep.
Okay, all right, that answers my question. Thank you so much. Thank you, Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Ballard?
Just a quick comment. I really differ with Representative Carpenter, but I want to just a little more on it. If we come down to 6 and below, we don't owe the feds anything. And yet, a lot of the errors that we're making in SNAP are human errors. And when I have checked, which I did in the summer with NCSL, National Conference of State Legislatures, a lot of the states indicated they were eliminating human error because they were going to computer, or they were computerizing it, or they were doing it electronically and everything else, and that cut down on the errors. If what I hear you say, maybe a little investment in maybe that software, or however you want to do it to cut down on human error, could possibly bring us down to 6 or below, and then we owe nothing, and not worry about paying $40 million in exchange for maybe spending.
Yeah, thank you, Representative. No, I think you've said that very well. And know that, some of the things that we've done, and again, we were already bringing the rate down before the federal rules came into effect. But we've talked with, a handful of states who kept their rate really low, even during the pandemic and after the pandemic, when you were seeing the national thing kind of shoot up, and we were kind of shooting up with it, really close to the average, or maybe a little above or below it. And they said several things. I mean, one had to do with some of the policy changes that we're doing, where they said, it may mean that there's some delay in benefits because of putting in some more criteria at the front end. And that's like, for example, the new shelter policy that we did to make sure that everything was fully verified at the front end. But the other thing that they told us, and we talked to Wyoming, talked to Nebraska, was that they were using the technology to reduce human errors. Everything from kind of intelligent document processing to, again, like using the AI, using the bots to try to, avert those errors. So again, there's actually nothing I'm really saying here in terms of our tools and strategies that are any different than I think you'd probably hear in 20 other state houses right now, because as all the states are struggling to do it, the consultant we brought in really confirmed what we were doing, has some additional ideas about some policy pieces, but the technology piece, I think across the board, states are saying, it's not that you want to fully rely on that, but I think it just gives you that extra piece to say, gosh, if we could eliminate 2% of the error because of that, and the rest because of everything else we were doing, just maybe gives you that cushion to get that number as low as you can possibly get it, and also sustain it. If, for example, you had a lot of staff turnover, you had staff with less experience, to have tools that are going to help them to do it right. So again, that's why we're asking for it. And again, I understand that it's resources, but when I think about that compared to what the impact could be if we don't get those rates down, I just felt really compelled to make that request.
Representative Steens, do you have a question?
I do. Thank you, Mr. Chair. A real quick question, following up on job requirements. And I know this was touched on a little bit, but do you know of part of that, or part of what we do also here in Kansas? Do they do job training or provide transportation or childcare services? Just curious for people who have those requirements. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Representative. It depends on the situation, but yes, certainly it's part of what the resources we're asking for is to assist folks with things like job training. There are ways also in which folks can qualify for child care assistance when they're doing certain training activities, as well as working. So yes.
Representative Wolcott?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to go back a little bit on the IT side and to follow up on some of the SNAP questions. As you were going through some of that, I'd asked earlier, and we spend about $66 million to administer SNAP benefits, was my understanding. And we spend about $427 million is what we administer. So we're about a 1/7 of administration costs for that. Are these IT increases that you're asking for, are they going to be in addition to that 60? Is that going to be administrative? Is that associated with administrative costs, or is that going to be some other bucket that's associated? Are we going to increase from 1/7 to 1/6 or 1/5 the cost to administer?
Yeah. If you don't mind, Representative, let us look at that, because I think some of those might fall in that bucket and some might not. I'd rather give you an accurate answer than just kind of fly. Okay. Yeah, we can look at that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Representative Reese?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mine is more of a comment than a question, and that is that if you're familiar with the application process for SNAP or for Medicaid, for anything like that, then you kind of, and you're either the one applying and or the person that is completing the application with the applicant, you'll understand how complicated and how easy it is to make errors. And one example, if you have applied for Medicare, or you've helped anybody apply for Medicare, that is one complicated system, and one error will just mess you up for a whole year. And so in a lot of that you can do online. And I have a lot of knowledge in that, and I had a hard time helping. I've helped several people with their applications, and it's difficult. So anything that we can do to bring down this error rate, and if it's going to take more funding up front for something that we didn't ask for. The feds are bringing this to us and telling us, this is what you got to do, and if you don't, here's the repercussions, here are the consequences for it. And I agree with the secretary, if we have the funding in order to help with the IT piece of it, so that we can be more consistent, I think that would be money well spent. Thank you.
Rebuttal, Representative Carpenter. Okay. Okay. I do have one maybe additional question. So, first one, and if we don't have it today, I'd maybe have your staff get back with us. I heard Amanda say Accenture, and so when Accenture rings in my head, due to some previous experiences in my military and other life, I get very weary. Oftentimes, they sell products that are incomplete, and I would like to know that whatever tools we're working with, are they turnkey or are they developmental? That to me is just something to just look out for. So anything with Accenture, and there's a few others out there that just really get my attention. So that'd be the first one. Is I don't know if you can answer that, if they're turnkey systems that are going to fix some of these problems, but if it's going to require any development, they're going to gut the state of Kansas. That would be my personal experience with them. So that's one observation. The second thing would be is, and I'm not going to, we obviously have two different points of view that were presented today in terms of the technology intervention to reduce the error rate. I don't know that I understand fully, or if we do, what specifically and I think maybe Representative Orpeza said this, are there changes that were specifically made or that are part of the One Big Beautiful Bill that require technology intervention that we don't have the capability today? So it's one thing to make and buy technology to just get better, but is there any part of the One Big Beautiful Bill that says, hey, we don't have this capability in the state of Kansas today that it would be a considered must-do investment? So that would be another question to take a look at. Okay.
Yeah, we can come back on both of those, Representative, sure.
Okay. So committee, I know we are late in the day. We are over time. I'll give you one last chance. I'm going to wave off. Madam Secretary, thank you for coming. Staff, thank you for being here and staying late. And for those of you in the audience who made it to the end, thank you very much. Someone will start singing shortly. Not me. Yep, we are a wrap. Thank you.